Okay, guys, so we're now heading into, let's say, hopefully a slightly more interactive part of this event. And we're going to start by now having a let's say, dialogue-based session here, which we've called Lessons Learned from Commercializing a Research-Driven Innovation Project. You've already heard like some stick words and ideas of some of the lessons that these guys have learned through their startups and through being a researcher and also starting companies. But we're probably going to try and follow up more concretely on a couple of them to try and summarize the overall introductions you've had today. We want to also, of course, invite you guys to join in on that conversation. So if you have additional questions to the ones we're addressing, or comments along the way, or also if any of you other speakers have questions or comments, by all means, feel free to share them, and we'll pass you the throwable mic. And then we will gradually finish off that session and then also finish off this streaming and lead over to a even more low threshold dialogue where we also bring up other startups in the audience here and researchers who have been through these things but didn't necessarily present today, to just simply have a more low-key talk interaction about life in a startup, maybe follow up even more on some of the most important points, and also other questions that might occur that you might have, even, I don't know, even if you have an idea you briefly want to bring up and discuss. And that part will not be streamed. So again, then we really want to encourage everyone sitting here physically to join in on the conversation, and your voice will not be recorded. Yeah, but first of all, I have with me then these two amazing guys here, Rahmi and Marius, which you've already heard from. And then we're going to also have Lars, Ailo, Bongo join us. He gave us a brief introduction to the SFI visual intelligence in the beginning, but I'm going to allow Lars to just shortly introduce himself again, and also the company that he has been co-founding in addition to the research, before we get started with the conversation.
Yeah. So thank you again. So I'm Lars. I'm a professor at the Department of Computer Science, and that's my full-time job. I was the co-founder of Medsensio, this company, but I don't have any like active role there. I don't get any salary from them. I'm in the board and so on. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background what this company is and sort of how it came to being. So the company, what it does is that it provides basically the base technology is machine learning for stethoscope recorded lung and heart sounds. And then it basically detects abnormal sounds in that. And we can use those results to build products such as like a training tool or monitoring of people with lung or heart diseases and so on. Yeah, so, oops. I had more slides than this, so like that. So this company, it started off as a research project. So we used data from the Tromsø study, which is basically like a big population study done like every maybe eight year in Tromsø. So this is like a sensitive health data set, and like that has been one of the maybe like things we managed to do in these companies, that we managed to do a machine learning based startup using like sensitive health data. And this time we used this data as part of 2 master student projects. They basically built sort of the machine learning models to analyze the data and find abnormal sounds. And then we did like a student startup, like where one of the students that worked with this technology in his master project got into a team with another master student from the business school here. And then I'm sort of the third co-founder that don't have really contributed too much to actually the success of the company. So this is 5 years ago. Since that, the company has been, for instance, received a big EU project. This was like Corona research, which is a great thing for a company focusing on lung diseases. And also like a lot of work has been gone into like getting the necessary certifications for doing this type of medical technology. That's basically the background. So I may know something about how you can use like research data, even if it's sensitive, in a commercial setting. And I have some thoughts and ideas about how students can do startups. So I guess that is for me this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Lars, for the introduction. Lars is actually also in the steering group of Nora Startup. So highly eager startup enthusiast as well as the research. That's cool. Okay, again, just a reminder, any questions or comments along the way, you're welcome to either notify Bitter so she can notify us or notify us yourself. Let's just start by taking like one step back. So as everyone has learned, you are all still currently researchers, but have also chosen to pursue the business side of things and working on building a company. So if we just take like one step back, and because I know there's been some questions related to this in several occasions, we briefly touched base on it, but maybe slightly more emphasized from your experience. What would you say is like the main difference between doing a research project, like fully research, versus a startup project, which then is built into a business? Anyone can start.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, being a researcher is, as I said in the presentation, then you have your own idea, you have your own vision, and then you're following that. In order to, in my field, in molecular genetics, you need funding. So that means you need the right grants, get the funding, and then you pursue the research, and at the end you publish or communicate your results. And that is one way, right? I mean, maybe an external board judges your grant, see whether it is valuable to fund or not. But if you're in a startup world, you're building a product, and building of the product does not follow this trend of you having an idea and pursuing it for many years. Of course, you have an idea, you should have a vision. But how are you going to realize and create a value out of it? The path is totally different. Totally different from in terms of product development, attracting investments. So that's actually is a pretty different mindset. That's how I see as the main differences. And I mean, there are many more elements to this. You would like to publish, that's your main way of channel of communication. That is totally irrelevant for a company. Of course, if you publish, there are always benefits to publish and share your results. And the second thing is maybe you have heard from the TTOs as well in terms of IP protection. I think universities are pushing for getting patents out. For example, in the domain that we are operating, is totally irrelevant to get a patent. Actually, I would rather recommend not to get any patent in AI research because it is so dynamic. Even if you patent something out now, and maybe that was one of the reasons that there were so many patent applications with the similar sounding headlines, because it's so active, dynamic field, it changes. So these are the kind of the things that I could maybe point out.
Yeah, and I agree, and I also think I mean one of the great things about research is that you could end up you know, not validating what you were looking for, but if you're making a product, you really you really have to deliver that product. Your head will come off, you know. So that's maybe one of those things that it's very commercial driven, startup world, which is that's been very hard for me to adapt to.
Yep. And as I mentioned, I'm one of those that haven't left academia. I'm still like working here, so I don't dare to do what you have done, which I'm actually quite impressed about, that you have jumped out from like a academic full-time position into like a role of a startup. Yeah.
You know, it's actually your fault, you know, because when I was just talking to Norinova, I met Lars Ailo at a similar event like this, and he had already done a few things. So I was like, I was inspired by your journey to do what I'm doing. So
thanks. So I guess that's my strategy, is to convince other people to do to do this. But like when it comes to like the difference between like academic research and what the things that are done in a startup. So like, and especially in AI, like the activities, they are quite research-like. Like there's a lot of like new technology developed. Like many of the things that startups do are probably like quite publishable in good journals. And DeepMind was like mentioned, which is like maybe like the best AI like research group in the world, and that's a commercial company. But what I think like the main difference is basically that we are focusing more on like basic research, while in a startup you're doing more applied things.
May I add one thing?
Yes, sure.
I think one thing that I came to realize while I already hopped onto the journey was that we as researchers sit in a really high, we have a lot of competence, but we're not using the competence for creating value. And creating value became an important aspect to me is because what we take proud of is doing, you're free to do research, right? I mean, you decide what to do, which is great, but you have to think that we are doing all that with taxpayers' money. So we have a responsibility to deliver. We are delivering in one way by publishing, sharing our findings, because that's we have been funded for. But what I realized that I'm also, a user, right? I mean, I buy stuff and I buy goods, and I see that we can contribute to, if you will, sustainability. Maybe not there yet now, but we are on the path. And then it kind of made me realize, I'm not contributing, and I can contribute. I have that potential. That was kind of maybe the change in mindset, that you want to be part of the production. You can create value, but it's not a contrasting. So that should not be also sounding as if you're off with a commercial focus, but you're dropping the academic thinking. It's not in that way. It's complementing. But you're in Europe for some reason. If you look at you have seen the charts was presented by the IP person. Europe is really good in doing high-end research, but we are really bad in getting that out in the market. But why? If you're running a computer and if you have an idea that computer can run better, but why to leave that one on academic research level? Why can't you just get it out? I think it should get out because I'm using a computer and everybody else does. So if you have anything to say to make things better, I think that's a great opportunity. So I don't know what picture we are drawing here, but it should not be felt as like contradicting. As Lars said, things do run in parallel. And as I said, for our field, we need to get data, and data can only be generated by running a research like an academic research.
Just to add one more thing, like there are a limited number of like associate professor and professor positions, and especially for the students here that are maybe on the PhD or postdoc, like this may be like a very cool thing to do, where you can actually develop like very exciting technology. So I think like all the students should actually consider, do I want to actually become a professor, or is it more fun to be a CEO or CTO or whatever?
That's a good point there, Lars. And actually, there are many benefits of starting, just as a side comment, starting a startup as a student, either a master or a PhD, because you're often in a completely different phase of life as well that makes things easier. You don't have the same obligations necessarily as later in life. And you also have funding opportunities through the Research Council, for instance, who particularly fund student projects and so forth, just as a side comment. But that's thank you for all the good input here on the lessons learned, like the actual differences between doing research and startup. And I mean, you're a bit different in the sense that some of you have chosen to combine the two, and maybe like Lars here, taking more a co-founder role and a supportive role rather than an actual lead CEO role, where you might in a period might have left research, as you say. But so there's also different ways to go along in that sense. But perhaps also, Lars, you could say something about how, like, if you are a researcher and you want to get involved in a startup, but you don't necessarily want to start it yourself or drive it, but you want to be participant in founding it and using your competence, not least, as Rahmi also mentioned. What's your lessons learned and experience with kind of finding other people around you that still can help, can take lead on the research-driven startup? You mentioned students. How did you go forth in that sense?
Yep. So no, I think like the really great resource to have access to as a professor is the students. Like, you have many young people that are very good at the things they do. So it's basically just a matter of convincing them, okay, maybe you should think of doing this. And I think like this year, so we at UIT, like we have tried basically to build a culture for entrepreneurship at UIT. So we started something we call like the Digital Technology Innovation Lab, where we had hired a guy in a part-time position basically to support students that are interested in doing startups. Like also like based on the lessons we learned from the Medsensio case, where maybe the concept wasn't really in place when we did the startup, so we could have actually help them more at as a university. So I think it's just like as a professor, maybe you can encourage your students, like build the culture in the research teams, like startups is cool, and this is something that we really care about. But also like the university should also support students that are interested in doing this by actually providing like quite active mentorship and help them to apply for funding from, as you mentioned, Student or other place.
So how do you, the rest of you over here, how do you then, since you've maybe been having an even more active role in leading the company forward, how's your like main lessons learned with regard to combining these two worlds? And I mean, you have a team as well, of course, but it's maybe been built up in a slightly different way than Lars here.
I think that I think for me it's been hard to combine because I have a CEO role and quite a large team and a lot of responsibilities. And also one thing that should be mentioned is that you know, if you're a PhD and you go into, if you create a startup, one of the things that you can't really publish the results. So, and to get hired, to get tenure, you need some kind of a list of publications. So, and that's so I'm not publishing now. I'm applying for a professorship. I'm an associate professor, and that it's going to leave a hole in my academic record, which is not really fillable with what I'm doing. So that's one of the challenges I've experienced, you know. But apart from that, I feel that there's, I mean, the university doesn't really have a good system for, you know, for like if you take a leave of absence to work in a startup, there's no system that enables that. They don't have like a box to check up in the HR department where it says startup, you know. So that, but I think they're working on that. But of course it's a small university, so people are very, they find solutions, you know. So it's been very easy for me to get everything I ask for.
I don't know if maybe Odin or like add on something to that.
Regarding the last.
Let's pick the mic.
I'm not going to throw it that far.
Regarding the last bit, the leave, now they are working at the university, because, you know, when you're a university PhD, you have 1 year of where you have to teach one of the 4 years, 3 years PhD and 1 year you teach. And they are thinking of making that a commercialization year. So you get 4 year PhD and 1 year you can work with a potential startup or commercialization idea. So you can write patents and things like that. And then you have the time to do that without hampering your academic career. And also for assistant professor and professor, they have this sabbatical every 5th year. And they are thinking about now establishing a commercial sabbatical so that you can get a sabbatical for 1 year. Normally they travel abroad and work in other institutions, but you can work in your startup that year. So that is, I think at some universities this has been implemented already, and I think this is also going in this direction at the university in Tromsø.
Thank you, Martin. That was interesting to fill in on that particular question. So I guess, I mean, brings me to another question, which is often also discussed here and there and up and down and different opinions. But you guys, why would you say it's, yes, there are challenges and one should definitely be aware of them and be open about them as well. But at the same time, you're all very clear that there are a lot of advantages and a lot of great fun and stuff happening with also commercializing research and combining the two. But what would you say is it? Why would you say it is important that, again, maybe not all research, but that at least some research is actually commercialized, and that this mindset is also kind of implemented a bit more across the two environments? Why would you say this is important?
want to start?
It's your turn.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm going to repeat myself. It's just that the realization that you can create a value. I think for me, of course, the difficulties that I can tell is that when you reflect back, you may miss one point. I think one of the important things that we are two. If we were not being two, we would never establish what we have right now. Because if Gurvinder was not in the picture, he could not do what I could do, and I could not do what he does. So I think the important thing is maybe going back to what Lars was saying, it's creating the environment. You know, you never, if I were to tell, regardless whether you are following an academic research or a student or not, never be alone. It's really a big undertaking, and you don't want to do all this on your own. So maybe, I don't know how much falls into what you started off right now, but so don't be alone, but then going back to why you do it, it's just a realization that you could do it. But from another criticism, because in academic research sounds all fancy and all great, but is actually extremely frustrating. I have a concrete example of multiple of them, but one I can tell. I had an idea in 2015. We wrote the grant in 16. It was granted end of the 16. It took 5 years to publish it. And I had the idea in 2015 and it came available to everybody by, you know, after 6-7 years. If you're a company, I mean, one of the wishes that I have is that actually I can crunch ideas much quicker. So I don't have a drive for commercial. I mean, I want to succeed, that's one thing, but I'm not doing it for the financial benefits. First, it's great. It's a totally different learning experience. You will never experience this. Is like being a parent. If you don't have a kid, you will never know what it means to have a kid. And you cannot learn these things. You have to be on the ground. I think that's kind of understanding your potential and really wanting to create a value with guidance around. And as I said, I'm not doing this on your own, even though I'm here alone here now. So that's the kind of you know, all the knowledge, the years, the experiences that, you know, whatever that you have had that makes you, you, and you put all your efforts and capacity into something that you think it has a potential. And then from there on, you give it a go. Whether it's a value is going to be successful or not was anybody's guess. I mean, you all know that the failure rate is 90%. So there's a good chance that you will fail, but you're playing against odds, and why not? You have to take risks, that's obvious, right? So nothing comes as a free. There is always a risk involved. But anyway, I mean, I'm repeating myself, but one of the things is that once you see a potential of value creation and you think that you have that competence and you go for it.
Yeah, and I think that also for me, it was kind of not only that you want to do it, but also I kind of needed to do it. We had this, you know, when for us, I think you maybe remember when we started working with the hospital and we saw the use that the nurses had, you know, we just saw how they were like, this is helpful to us. It really changes how I work. You know, when they started saying stuff like that, that's when we were kind of, this is when we were kind of thinking of starting a company, and I started, you know, not getting sleep at night because I was like wondering, should I do it or not? And then I just, you know, I have to do it. I can't not do it. That's when we went into doing that company. So I think that's you feel that when you have a good enough idea, you have to do it.
From my point of view, like the main reason for doing it's fun and interesting, especially if you don't take the risk. As I do. But also like I also think that in a field like AI or machine learning, which is also has like great practical like possibilities, like just being part of a startup and having done that once that actually improves your research. Like you do better research by that. And also, like even if like there is a startup or a spin-off resulting from a research group, it doesn't mean that they are sort of totally out of the picture. So we have like research collaboration with Medsensio. So there are also many opportunities after someone has done a startup to actually do collaboration projects.
And I think, you know, when we talk about risk, I mean, the risk you're taking is basically your company not making it. But I mean, you do get funding along the way, you get paid, you know, there's a lot of really good options available that will help you kind of work your way up the scale. And then at some point you either fail or someone earns a lot of money. So it's I mean, the risk is basically just leaving a 1 or 2 year gap in your academic record, which is not good when you're applying for a professorship, but you know.
Also, not to give a negative spin to it, failure is actually really good. At least in the field that I operate in, molecular genetics, most of the learning happens by troubleshooting. You don't learn things by plugging thing into and it fits right. You didn't learn anything there. If it doesn't fit and it fails, then you start the tweaking it, then you learn. Actually, learning does not happen if you don't fail. So failure is a strong part of it if you have a vision. You know, if your vision is to establish, you know, if you don't have a vision, if you fail, it will be dramatic. You will be devastated. You will always get devastated, but you have to have a vision. And then if you know what your vision is, the failure will help you actually. There's a kind of interesting dilemma there, but that just, again, you have to be in it to experience it.
That's a good takeaway. I mean, this is very learning by doing, and definitely failure and learning from that failure is an important part of the path. And actually, I know we do in the audience. There's a question here I see, and I was also going to refer to the person sitting next to you with the question, because there is a person in the audience here called Benjamin who will join in the conversations later as well. But and you're a professor at UIT, but you've also formerly founded a company, a startup, and that did not turn out a success. So perhaps we'll throw it over here to the audience again, or you can come up if you want, so we can see your face. Up to you, and hear from your experience, and then we will give you
I can comment.
feel free to
Yeah, I don't know.
grab a chair and sit down. You can take mine.
Maybe
You can take mine.
No. Yes. So what is the question exactly?
So
Sorry.
it was mentioned here that
Yeah.
there's a lot of learning through failing as well.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
of course, here are 3 startups who are currently still succeeding, which is great. But perhaps you have some views on the not succeeding part. But at the same time, you saw commercialization of research and starting like building value through companies and research-based companies also important, although it failed to start at back some years. So just to get some different views, different angles on on the
So,
concept.
so a few words about that, because probably I will also talk about that at the next session. But yes, I started a startup because I had this opportunity, and I spent more or less 1 year doing that. But at the end, well, it failed. So it's also very interesting to share this experience. I was not disappointed because it failed. Okay, it's very rich experience. So I was quite happy to do it, even if it failed. It failed for many reasons. Maybe I can explain that later on. But that's a part of the process. And I don't know exactly how many startups fail. It's maybe I don't know, 80% or even more sometimes. So it's normal. It's normal to fail. I mean, so you should not worry about that. And even if it fails, then you are not stuck. You can jump to another job. So I had the opportunity to come back to academia, but you could also jump to start a new startup if you want, or go back to some big company. So that's, I mean, the experience is very valuable. So that's the thing I want to say. We can switch. Yes.
Actually, we can bring this down to your the guy sitting next to you.
Hello, thank you. So as a researcher, I think of this startup entrepreneurship part of the startup as the dirty work, money work, the boring part. But I'm sure many feel the other way. Finding these individuals that are interested in the entrepreneurship part of the startup might be difficult. So I was wondering if you could share some experiences with this, finding these individuals, or finding collaboration with the right individuals. Team members, exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if you. Well, I mean, yeah, so I didn't start alone, so we have a really good friend and colleague. And the idea has taken shape once we started to communicate. When we started talking, maybe early 17, there wasn't any idea of at this scale. But that's what I said, like, so I had a vision and he had a vision. It just happened to be overlapping. Of course, it has changed now. I mean, you always have to pivot based on development, never be on one line, which are my criticism as well. You have to be flexible. You have to listen to customer to adapt. But in a way, for us, it's like I wasn't looking out for someone, or neither he. So we came together, started talking, and then, but we had a focus on, we could use our knowledge, knowing that what biology can provide, and then landed on what we have. So for us, maybe it was more organic, but I happen to also know that, there are great ideas. You need someone to execute. I mean, there are also good cases of that one. So I think to me is you have to be open, involved, network creation, talking practically. I mean, you don't want to give away for free. So you have to be restrict yourself in terms of what you're sharing and how much you're sharing. But to me is, being active, finding someone is, again, you should not be alone. But finding the good partners also is important. I mean, you read many books and all that, as they say, companies do fail, but they fail for different reasons. But a good reason is that the team is not right. That kind of stands up high. I don't know if the experiences do tell here, but so I would think that there is a really important parameter.
Okay, so we had in the beginning when we were working, we had like a business part of the company, even though it was just done a 5-member team. So we had 3 developers and 2 people working on the business side, 2.5, and we hired a person like a business developer. She's an organization psychologist, and she works with the the lean startup method. If you're familiar with that way of working, which is like all of the Jira boards and all of that. That comes from that whole philosophy. Is basically you break down whatever you're gonna do in Monday morning. And then you make tasks, assign them to the team members, and then you do it, and then you check in on Friday and see if the sprint is done, and you have to answer if you're not done. And her biggest input to the organization was to not divide it into a business side and a tech side. So now it's just one big team. And I think that if you want to make a startup, you probably should you should get your hands dirty and also be involved on the business side, because one of the main reasons why organizations fail is because they're working on parallel paths. So now you have since it's such a small team, you have everyone working on the same thing. So this week, John is presenting for the NURA conference, so they will help me out finding the slides, And I help my developers, stress testing what they're doing. So we're all working with the same things. So everyone's involved. So I think that in a small organization like a startup, you should probably be open to being involved also on the business side. Of course, you have some people with competence there who lead that work, but you also need to work on that side. I think that's the best startups work like that. But of course, everyone works differently. But that really changed how we were working.
Do you want?
There's a question there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the question was where to find people. I think one very important thing to do when finding people is actually to go to events like this one and meetups. So for instance, if you go to, for instance, say sites like meetup.com, there will be plenty of meetups which have like people in different businesses, and they talk and they drink beer. And when you drink beer with different people from different businesses, a lot of ideas come up. Maybe you find some interesting people that you would like to do something with. That has happened to me several times, and And it's also so that I know that several startups, for instance, that I know have found their people on these kinds of meetups and on events like this. So I think like going to events and talking to people is key.
Yeah, it's kind of like I mean, networking is important for researchers and also for startups, right? So it's kind of like networking like you do on research conferences, but just you do the same on more business related events like was mentioned here. But you also have some experience with students, right? That also a way of kind of getting confidence in others to join in the team.
Yeah, just want also to follow up on that. Like one of the things I learned like in the last year is that you can actually do a startup without establishing a company. Like the process that you sort of start thinking of things like you maybe have a goal of getting the finance to do a startup, but you have this pre-commercial step where you sort of like, what is the concept? Is it a good idea? What type of prototype do you need to do, and so on. And that's a lot of those things you can do on your spare time. So you don't actually have to think like it's not a very complicated thing. You could sort of do a startup this evening and discuss with someone over a beer, and maybe it fails by 9 o'clock. But at least that you had like the tiny seed to a startup, and you maybe figured out that this wasn't a great concept after all. Like your like the cloud and Aurora.
What do you mean? Wasn't it a good concept? Did we answer your question? I kind of.
That's good. And if there are any more questions, keep them coming also online. If you have any questions, Bitter will let us know. There is one. Okay. Do you want to announce it in the?
I don't know if it's a rumor, but I heard that if you attempt to be a startup but fail and then decide to take up a job, companies wouldn't prefer applicants with an entrepreneurial mindset. Is that true? Any comments on that? It's a terrifying question.
Well, I've never been there myself, so I wouldn't know. But if I were to hire someone, experience is always good, right? So.
Yeah, but that's same, but maybe also the mindset is different from the US and from Europe. So from the US, I think failing at a startup would be seen as a positive thing, because it's just doing something, being creative and taking risks. While in Europe, maybe a failure is more negative, let's say. So maybe, but at least I didn't feel that from my failure. It didn't impact me in this way.
Thank you for sharing that from the audience as well. No, I think it was mentioned mindset, and I definitely think the mindset has a lot to do here. So if you're adjusted to thinking, okay, they've failed, but they've actually tried, they've been creative, they've used their knowledge in new ways. I don't know what you guys think, but I would have thought that's in many ways positive. So maybe it's about the mindset, as was mentioned here on.
Yeah, I mean, if someone wouldn't want to hire someone with an entrepreneurial mindset, that's not a kind of job I would want. You know, that's. I mean, so I guess for some, like if you're hiring, I don't know, a low-level accountant, maybe you don't want someone who's creative, but you know, for a developer, I think having an entrepreneurial mindset is super important.
One more, great.
No, I can just answer from my personal experience. I've been helping a couple of startups develop as well, and I think that your point is pretty valid when it comes to helping start a startup, developing a startup, afterwards deciding that, you know, you want to apply for a job instead. You want to go to the employees that look at that part of your CV and says, wow, that's interesting. How did you do that? And how did it go? And that's the kind of jobs that you want as well, I would assume.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair point there, Britta. Great. Let's continue with because I know there's typically a lot of questions related to like the ownership of things when you and especially when you commercialize from a research, which is again often connected to the university and so forth, as has been mentioned here today. There are often a lot of follow-up questions on the ownership part of it, and I mean IP was also mentioned here in the talk today. So perhaps and there might be some follow-up questions on this as well, but perhaps you guys could share some of your, let's say, toughest lessons learned, but also good, valuable lessons learned with regard to like sorting out this whole ownership part of the technology and the company. And of course, it also depends a bit on the type of company you're building and product and which technology is used and so forth.
Let's create the separation. So if you're a student, if you have an idea, the university has no ownership because you're not employed, right? So you're a student. So if you're a student, you're free to go as you wish, as long as there is no result generated involving a research group or whatever. So you're free to operate. But if you are employed, like me, as a governmental organization, you are obliged to follow certain regulations, which are going to be in TTOs responsible following this up. So if you are a student, if you want to start rolling, help get in touch with people like we have heard today. That's great help. Your ownership. If you have some level of employment, you have to inform your employee. That's what it is. And how do you go from there? Well, that differs. For in our case, my colleague is not part of NTNU, so we had to land on a different deal. But I also know cases that people do operate without consulting TTO. Like, I mean, in your case, maybe it's not exactly they approach you, I guess, but I also know different organizations or different establishments that are pursued without consulting, and then they end up in not big trouble, but in trouble in one way or another, because as an employee, as governmental employee, you are obliged to inform your employee. I mean, long story short, if you have developed something, there is a commercial potential, you can't get away from TTO. So yeah, my advice would be, be upfront early on and then see where it goes from there.
I guess that this obligation information applies as long as your idea is relevant to your main profession, right? Like if you are hired by the university as a biologist and you develop an idea to clear the skies from Aurora, well, maybe there might be a common ground here, but if not, then you're just free to go, right? You're
well, not exactly. You still need to clear it. So, I mean, yeah, you're right. So if you are doing something completely out of your day-to-day profession, you're free to operate, but still that has to be confirmed. I would recommend, even though you know that the result is, I mean, you need to get a sheet of paper saying, this is all right, that this individual can pursue this part of activity.
Can be more, Martin, not very your profession.
Well, if it is not clear that, then the second thing is that your employer wants, how are you 100% having time having, so regardless, you
have, it's good to have just to be very clear, and I think that that this is something that, then I think it's the threshold for your property. It's they would, but also specific to clarify. And I think it's also because you have you came up with an idea, then you license that idea company that the to use that idea, this licensing, because then of course the company you have like a 50, but then that's what you want when they give you money. So then you say to your investors, we're going to be, investors for the rest of his lifetime, and to have investors that ever. So, and that's had and the right investors. I know also is work has had, we're one of the people who said looking for investors for you. So that's and also make sure that you too much of your company. If you've heard, although we're worth millions, huge sums, you end up with because you investor does too much of you, because there's when you come to PSA, those from Wall Street, founders should have of the equity to go to a Series A, and then if you company to the first investor, then that's of course, and many VCs do not companies who are where the founders do not own more. So that's why you get those valuations, because I need 4 million, but I'll do 2 more rounds, so be about 10% money.
Yep. I also think that learning startup business agreement with it can be very useful, like especially if you feel like or knowledge is basically based like machine learning on the Tromsø study. So we have UIT. Part of the income agreement is about 5. So, but that is not important. Like my share of that, where the money is. Like if you having shares, that's if you want to make money, will probably the big bucks from. So the reason why this is useful for what it costs, Medsensio has a not the study. There's like you could spend 50 minutes. That has to do with the what we are allowed to do, and not results. That is the learning model of certain products, and it other complex. Like if someone use the Tromsø study to develop like a model for like patients, then they can have exclusive access to do. So I think like that this agreement is actually securing access and important, and the raw data to the annotation by all the researchers with. So I think like do afraid of this too. Sounds scary to give your invention or more. This is not the problem at all.
And one more benefit of funding that I mentioned. So then EU has programs which apply if governmental funding agreement, you're eligible funds, and there are dedicated grants private. If you have, and you're eligible to funding as well, which is an opportunity.
Great. Okay, thank you, all of you. A lot of knowledge in the room, guys. Important and interesting. Any more questions left? Briefly wrap it up.
Back to patents. How relevant is getting actually when a startup, because so pursue any patent breach small big companies?
One thing I heard, you have to decide, can you fight a lawsuit? You cannot fight a lawsuit to get a patent. That's an interesting discussion about teching or whatever. Company while infringes, can you will, and if it finances to has father lose it, and you know it from that's a different, whether you need a license or not. You have to think of the finances as well.
Does Lila have anything you would like to share, or?
For Norway in the AIS, I think that patents would be important. So differentiate between failures based or not. But the overs that we see occasionally take into account nonetheless, and think about so many others from us. Some of the reasons it's about as about and look at the tech, see that of collaboration and show lots of solve the we have, and that also creates for innovation to have some way transferring that meds. That is what patent space.
Thank you, Lila. Benjamin?
From your experience, it looks investor they to have some before investing when with patents started. So is it now, or did you feel some pressure a patent to get some fundings?
Here.
Maybe.
I mean, yeah, I have a few patents. Recipe doesn't fit all. Judge your case as she see, you know, does it make sense? In case it doesn't. In our sense, it is so active. If you were to tomorrow, we had to, and it's really cost and extremely laborious. So for us, as of today, we are developing is of no specific to your question. I've been talking to investors. Any investment, we are not open for that. What? Oh, how? Because comes in that depends. But in the stages we are in, you buying a pet company, so and so portfolio. It's like everything where you are, who you are. But for us, it doesn't make. And the masters were not really have had any patent strong. That's what.
Yeah, I mean, unpatentable, so we just have to move. I do think from a side, you know, because the investors like spends like years surveying, of course. So to the, you know, the to be one of those companies, to have a more so a patent sake, but if you have a patent that's commercial, that's more attractive start who hasn't. But that's my impression.
We also are patentable technologies. Are still that we are in Medsensio, like easily done that we can. But one of the things to talk publicly about there, so I will.
Hey guys, thank you for the. I think we're gonna the now and audition in Nora with our who always debates by asking you guys how, in one-liner, how recommend a startup be able to help in this field, perhaps more easier for people involved. Nora startup help in this type of question.
Events like this, just like competency and in Norway.
Yes, I mean, creating also, you know, amounts of seed money. And you only need like get started with something like grants.
Several faults of any type of event is extremely valuable. It is extremely valuable. Second thing is, as I said, infrastructure. If AI, you can't any AI work without PCs or the hyper infrastructure. Would be one way or another. Give students, employees that they can crunch. Like you have to get, you have something on. I have access to high, strong computers. You can't, you know, idea. At least I would agree to get some funding or pre that the students can have ideas. That is all what it takes to.
The point regarding that's and the that's actually something currently is a research which is going to a national structure on that, but we're not put more information on our web. So guys, and thanks to those, we will now switch online session.